Hey everyone, and welcome back to another mining chamber video. In today's video we are going to take a look at Chia mining and see how it works, and then we're also going to go through the mining process, which is plotting and then farming it, and then after that I'll give you my opinion on it and whether if it's worth starting Chia mining or not. Now let's go ahead and get into it right after the intro. Chia mining has been extremely popular lately, so I decided to take a look into it and bring you guys up to date with what Chia is. Chia is a cryptocurrency made in August 2017 that runs on the goal of being green. By green, it means less power consumption than the usual way of mining, which uses GPUs, ASICs, and all the other hardware that falls under the consensus protocol of proof of work. There is no other utility to it than just the base of running green, so it isn't like helium hotspot mining, for example, which also serves for the purpose of a global network. If you want to learn more on that, then I have a video on it that I will be linking in the descriptions below. At the time of this video, the Chia network coin is priced above $1,500, and they have been quite volatile, so the price will be moving around a lot. Now, Chia has a credible team behind it. It is made by Bram Cohen, the inventor of the infamous BitTorrent, and they also have their own programming language, which is Chia Lisp. It's a smart transaction programming language that we won't be getting into in this video. Now, Chia runs on a different consensus protocol to remain green, like I mentioned earlier. So instead of proof of work, it uses proof of space and time. Proof of space and time can be pretty confusing to grasp at first, but in short, proof of space is when you allocate space for plots on your storage device. These plots are usually 101 GB in size, and they can be more as well, which I will talk about in the plotting setup. So in simple terms, what these plot files are, they can be considered as solutions to the problems that are provided by the network to approve transactions. And when you are selected for the correct solution, then you validate and solve the block. So the more plots you have occupying space, the more chance of you winning a block reward. In technical terms, each of these plot files contains 7 tables. Those tables have 2 to the power of k entries, and k being the plot you initialize, which we will talk about in the plotting section. Now, with all these random numbers in your tables, to be selected as the correct solution, you will have to have 64 x values that have a certain mathematical relationship. These x values are selected from your tables based on a certain pattern, but you don't really need to know this information. But if you are interested in learning more about the specifics, you can visit Chia Consensus documentation, which I will have linked in the descriptions below. It's a pretty complex algorithm, but it's also very interesting to read about. But for the sake of this video, I just want you guys to have an idea of how it works, and then we will cover the technicals later if you guys want a video on that. Now, proof of space itself is not secure. That is why Chia also uses proof of time. Proof of time is another piece of the solution. It is a cryptographic proof that some time has passed in the plots, so that no one can alternate those tables in the plots to predict or correspond with the proper 64x values. So that's why there's a proof of time that those plots have been plotted and they've been on the storage device for a certain amount of time. Now that is the consensus algorithm for Chia, proof of space and time. Hopefully that was clear to understand, and if I get anything wrong, please let me know in the comments below. And now, before I talk about the steps to start farming Chia, which is plotting and then farming it, let's first have a quick word from today's video's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Raycon. In a field such as cryptocurrency mining, there's always a lot of amazing content creators to listen to and learn something new from them while going on a run or sitting at home. Now that is why I present to you Raycon earbuds. Raycon earbuds are pristine quality earbuds that come at affordable prices. They also have a great battery life of 6 playtime hours, and they seamlessly pair to your mobile phone through Bluetooth. Raycon also has different colors and fits for their earbuds, and if they do not live up to your expectations, you can always return them through their 45-day free return policy. Comparing to other premium earbud brands, Raycon earbuds come at only half the price, and you will also get 15% off by visiting buyraycon.com/miningchamber. The link will also be in the descriptions below. Thank you, Raycon, for sponsoring this video. So the first step in the process is plotting your hard drives. So now what plotting is, it's basically a process where you create the files with the 7 tables. Now these plots are connected to your 24-word seed phrase for your wallet, so make sure that you keep your 24 seed phrase somewhere safe. And the reason being is that whenever you want to move your hard drive to somewhere else after you plotted it, you want to make sure that you load the same exact wallet, because if not, then it won't be farming for you. Now that is one of the reasons why pool farming is very complex, but we will talk about that more after plotting. So the time it takes to create these files are based on the specs of your PC, or in other words, your plotter. The plotting happens in 4 different phases, and the first phase is where it takes the most time and computational power. There are also different sizes of plots, but generally you just want to do the K32 sizes. So if you choose to go below K32, it won't be accepted in mainnet, so it won't count, and above 32 is only useful if you're trying to maximize space, which really comes out to less than 1% difference. There is a calculator online you can use to see how many plots you can fit on your drive to maximize your drive space, but like I mentioned, most of the time you'll just have to go with K32. I will leave the calculator in the descriptions below if you're interested. And if you're confused what GIB means instead of GB, for example gigabytes instead of gigabytes, then let me explain. So GIB or gigabytes is basically the absolute value that you actually can use as storage. So for example, when you buy an 8TB hard drive, Windows shows you that you can't really use a full 8TB. Some of it is used or some of it is just not there. And that number that you're seeing is the TIB, so the TB. So the way that you buy them is through terabyte, but then the way that you use them is through TB. Plotting takes 2 destinations. First, you have your temporary space, and that's where it's first created. And then after that, it's going to be moved to the final destination where the plot will be staying and farming from. Now in the temporary side, the plot will need a minimum of 239 gigs while it's being created, and then after it's created, it's compressed and it's moved to the final destination, and then it will only occupy 101 gigs. And also make sure that you avoid using your operating system storage as your temporary storage. That will eventually kill it for you, and then you will lose your files and your operating system. So please be careful. So you can keep plotting until you maximize your drive. So for example, let's say you have a 10TB drive, then you can put in it 91 plots of the K32, which will take around 99.04% of your storage. Now you can also use the larger sizes of plotting if you want to get more efficiency, but like I said, it's a very small amount. A couple of things you want to keep in mind when plotting is that it does take a toll on your temporary storage. So whatever you're using as a temporary storage, which is preferably an SSD or an NVMe drive, if you choose one that is pretty low quality, then you can expect it to die in a month of plotting. So it's definitely something that you need to keep in mind, and I will talk about it more in the minimum specs for plotting. As for your final destination, it can be any hard drive, so speed does not matter at all you need to care about is the capacity. So don't use an SSD or an NVMe, which are expensive comparing to hard drives, as a final destination unless you're just plotting casually on your PC with just one drive, which means yes, you can use the same drive for your temporary and final destination if you want to, which is not ideal, but if you want to do it just to test it out, then you can feel free to do so. So now before we talk about the farming, let's talk about the minimum specs for plotting. There's a lot of details you need to keep track of, but if you are confused and it seems like it's hard to get, I am going to be leaving a couple of configurations in the descriptions below of systems that you can build and how much potentially they can be able to plot for you. So if you don't understand this part and you just want to buy a system and get going, then you can feel free to look in the descriptions or just upgrade your own system based on the parts that you're missing. Like in this guide, I will be using my own PC to plot and show you guys as an example, and that should help you out also understand what you need to do to use your own PC for plotting. So now let's talk about the minimum specs. So first you have your CPU, RAM, and temporary storage. These 3 are your main factors for how much plotting you can do. The goal is to be able to plot as much as you can at the same time, which comes down to parallel plotting. So the way that this works is, let's say for example you get an AMD Ryzen 7 3700X with 8 cores and 16 threads. Now the cores and threads is what you want to focus on for the CPUs. The speed of the CPU also matters a lot for how fast you can plot it, but the amount of plots that you can run in parallel comes down to your cores and threads. So since this Ryzen has 8 cores and 16 threads, that means hypothetically I can do 8 plots in parallel with this CPU. Now if you have low amount of RAM that doesn't support 8 plots in parallel, then you will be bottlenecking yourself from the RAM, and that also works the same way with your temporary storage. So you need to make sure that you get the proper balance between all 3 components so you're able to maximize efficiency and not have one part that's way too much of an overkill comparing to the other parts. So your little cheat sheet will go like this. One plot needs 4GB of RAM, and it needs 2 threads, and it needs 240 gigs of space. So now you have that as the base. So for example, if I want to grab this AMD Ryzen 7 that has 8 cores and 16 threads, then I would multiply how many plots I can run on this CPU, and then based on that I will get the other components. So since I can do 8 plots on this CPU, then I will multiply 8 by 4, which will give me 32 gigabytes of RAM. So that means I need to get 32 gigabytes of RAM to be able to maximize the RAM with this CPU. And for storage, I'll be multiplying 8 by 256 gigabytes, which will give me around 2048, but we'll round it down to 2 terabytes, which means I'll only be able to do 7 plots on a 2 terabyte SSD. so that means we're just one plot behind. But also your temporary storage plays a big part in how fast you plot. Now that's why I mentioned NVMe, because generally this is the fastest option that you can go with for plotting. Now there are other options out there that are fairly fast, like the U.2 for example, but just for the sake of this guide we will go over the NVMe's and tell you guys what you need to keep in mind when you're buying a storage device for plotting. So the first thing you want to pay attention to is the read and write speeds. Now these read and write speeds are majorly impacted by the generation of the storage device. So if your NVMe storage is Gen 3, then you're most likely capped out at 3500 megabytes per second. And if you have a Gen 4, then you can go up to 7000 megabytes per second. And that's important because when it comes to buying your motherboard, if you have a Gen 3 PCIe lanes on your motherboard and you have a Gen 4 NVMe, then you will be capped out with the Gen 3 on the motherboard. So make sure that you get Gen 4 PCIe lanes motherboard if you have a Gen 4 NVMe SSD. And other than the read and write speeds, which impact how fast you plot, you also have your TBW. Your TBW is basically how much terabytes you can write on that drive until it dies out. And that's important because when you're plotting, you're always constantly writing on that drive and deleting and writing, so it will eventually kill it super fast. Now TBW is not something that you will generally find on Amazon or whenever you're shopping on it, but you'll definitely have to do some research and try to find some good ones for the TBW. Now one thing you want to keep in mind with maintaining the health of your NVMe SSDs is by keeping them in cool temperatures. Now from plotting, they do get really hot, so you want to make sure you have a heatsink on it. So this MP600 already has a heatsink on it, but if you have something like this Samsung right here and it doesn't have any heatsink, then it is best for you to buy an external heatsink and then add it to it. It will help keep your NVMe cool, which is very recommended. Now usually some motherboards also come with that heatsink, so if you have a heatsink already then you're fine, but if you're planning on using two NVMe's, then it is good to have another heatsink that you can use later on. Now for the ones that I'm leaving in the descriptions below, they're fairly good, so you can feel free to pick one from them and then you're good to go. One thing I forgot to mention is your CPU cooler as well as your motherboard. So for your CPU cooler, usually if you're not going with a high-end CPU, you're fine with the stock cooler, but I do suggest getting a custom cooler, whether it's an air cooler or an AIO cooler, it's completely fine. Having a better cooler for your CPU while it's plotting will be beneficial, so you avoid thermal throttling and all that negative stuff. And then for your motherboard, all you need to look for is the compatibility with your CPU first, and then second you have your SATA ports and your NVMe slots on your motherboard. If you're going to get smaller size NVMe's, then having more than one slot of NVMe on your motherboard is very convenient. And for SATA ports, the more SATA ports you have on your motherboard, if you're planning on farming with it, the better, because that will show you how many hard drives you can have connected to that motherboard. I will also mention some adapters that you'll be able to use later on. So now that you got the main parts out of the way, the rest of the parts are the GPU, PSU, and your case, and then the storage that you want to plot to. So for GPU, you can choose to use your integrated graphics that comes with your CPU if it has one, but if it doesn't have one, you can use an external GPU. It can be any GPU, so even a really old GT 1030 is completely fine. Whatever just gets you a display going, that's completely fine for you. Now if you're planning on running it on Windows or a Linux with a GUI, then that will take some resources from your CPU, which you can be using for plotting instead, but it won't be that big of a deal. I will be making a video on doing one that's headless, so that means without a GPU and without a monitor as well. So now for the case, you guys can use any case you want for your plotter, but if you are planning to use it for farming as well, then I highly suggest looking for ones that have a lot of HDD slots. In the descriptions below, I left a couple of options with a bunch of HDD slots, so feel free to use that as your guide. And then finally you have the PSU. So for the PSU, since you're only going to be plotting with your CPU, you can get away with a 650 watts, but that is based on your CPU. If you're going to go with a Threadripper, then I would try to go with around 850 watts. So based on how much of a high end your CPU is, then increase your wattage, but you shouldn't need more than 850 watts in general, unless you're also farming with the rig. If you're also farming with it and you're planning on plugging like 10 hard drives or 20 hard drives, then getting more power will be recommended. So going with a 1200 watt power supply, then that will be a good option. There is also a couple of adapters you can get to increase your slots on your motherboard. So for example, if you're trying to farm with it as well and your motherboard is limited to a certain amount of SATA ports, and if you run out of those ports, you can just buy these PCIe adapters that give you more SATA ports, so you can plug in more hard drives to plot to them and then have them farming in your system. There's also PCIe adapters for NVMe slots, so if you're out of NVMe slots to reach efficiency, then you can just buy one of these adapters and then you're able to plug in another NVMe SSD and then plot with it. So now that concludes all the parts for plotting / farming if you're planning on farming with it. And now the last thing we need to talk about is hard drives and farming. So now in the plotting process, like I talked, there is the final destination. That final destination is your hard drives, and you want to make sure you get high capacity. The higher capacity you have, the more plots you can store, and the more plots you can store, the higher chance you can win. And unfortunately, as of the date that I'm filming this video, hard drive prices are going up and they are going out of stock very frequently, but I will leave a couple of options in the descriptions below that you can use for farming Chia. Now let's talk about the farming process. First, you maximize your hard drives with plots, and then after you maximize your hard drive with plots, they automatically kick in and start farming for you. Now what's happening behind the scenes when it's farming, it's doing a couple of lookups in your hard drives plot tables, and then from there it will try to find those 64x values that I mentioned earlier. And if it finds them in the plots, then you win and you get that block reward. So your farming process is very resource minimal. You can even run it off of an old computer and just put all your hard drives in there after you finish plotting them, as long as you carry on the same 24-pin seed phrase in the wallet. Some people even do it with a Raspberry Pi. I personally will be doing it with something a little bit different, and I will be showing you guys whenever I do a video on it, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that out. Now just a couple of things you need to keep in mind when farming is you do need to have a stable internet connection. It can be either Wi-Fi or Ethernet, but it just has to be stable and it does not take much of your bandwidth, so don't worry about your internet going slower or anything like that. And I also did forget to mention that plotting takes no internet connection at all, so you can also plot offline, which is something I'm sure some people would want to know. Now one bummer about farming Chia in general is that if you do ever want to change your address, you would have to replot your hard drives completely. So if you do lose your wallet or your 24-pin seed phrase, all these plots that you've done, you have to redo all of them with the new wallet that you have. So let's say you want to farm with a friend of yours, so you guys have a higher chance to win, because the higher amount of plot space you have, the higher chances of you winning a block reward will be. Now if your friend already plotted their drives and they want to join you so you can have a higher chance to win, they'll have to replot their drives using your address. Which brings us to the talk about solo and pool farming. So currently the only official way to mine Chia is through solo farming, so there isn't really any official pools that are out there, but there are some talks about it. In this month there might be a couple of things that come out new about pools, and the benefits of this thing that's coming out is that you'll only have to plot once, and then from there you can change the pools. You can use different pools or different addresses without having to plot again. Now there's not much information about it yet, but whenever there is a lot more information on it, I'll probably be making a dedicated video to that as well. So which means all you're left with is solo farming. So now that you've got a good idea of how Chia works and plotting and farming, let's talk about the profitability and how profitable is solo mining Chia the date of this video being posted. So for calculating your profits, we're going to be using ChiaCalculator.com. Now this isn't an official Chia calculator, it's just made by a third party, but it's very useful and it will give you a really good idea of what to expect. So using 8 terabytes hard drive, you will have a chance of winning in 6 months, and that is as of the difficulty now. Now this total network space is growing exponentially, and the more this grows, the less of chances of winning. So just keep that in mind. If you're not aware of how cryptocurrency mining works in general and how difficulty works, I have a full video on that topic, and I will also link it in the descriptions below. So now looking at the total network space and how much it has been growing the past few weeks, you can see that your chances of winning will keep going lower and lower super fast. So to keep your expected time to win high, you'll have to keep plotting more and buying more hard drives to keep up and have a chance to win. So you can see here the estimated earnings are showing that I'll be making around $552 a month if I just buy a 8 terabyte hard drive, but that is a little bit misleading. So you want to keep in mind that in solo mining, you're not going to win anything until you actually solve a block and then get the reward. Now the reward of the block is 2 Chia network coins, and those Chia network coins right now are trading at around $1,505, which is really good for the price, but they still might go up and down, which is completely fine. So that means in 6 months, if you do win, you will be getting around $3,000, and that's how this calculation came around. So that's the main idea of calculating profits. Now this will be super useful when the pools are out, so you can calculate how much money you'll be making consistently. So you will be getting more consistent payouts, but they will be less because the network space will keep going up with it as well. So basically that's it for the profitability. We'll just have to wait for the pools to come out, but as of now, even solo farming does not seem so bad if you're planning on getting a lot of hard drives. I will tell you guys what's my plan and how many hard drives I'm getting in the conclusion, but before we get to that, let's first do a quick setup for plotting and farming. The quick setup will be done on Windows, and if you're using Linux, it will be a little bit different, but I will be covering that in another video. So first you want to go ahead and download the Chia GUI from chia.net, and it's super easy to get that set up, and then they will prompt you with a 24-word seed phrase that you want to back up. Make sure that you keep these words safe because that is your only way in back to your wallet. So after backing up your phrase and getting back to your wallet, you will be welcomed with something like this. One thing that you will have different is your status. Your status will show not synced, and usually it takes around 1 day to sync. But since I've had mine for a while, it shows that it's synced now, so don't worry about that. Just make sure they have a network connection and just keep it online until it finishes syncing. And if you're not going to be farming with the same device, then you don't need to worry about the sync at all. But you can also go ahead and get started with plotting. So the first thing you want to go ahead and click on is the plots section right here. And then after you click on that, yours will look slightly different because I have an active plot right now, but yours will look empty and it will just say add a plot or start a plot. So you want to go ahead and click on add a plot, and now we're at this screen. So now here you just want to leave your plot size as default, the K32. Like I mentioned, you can use the other ones, but it's only to maximize space, which really doesn't change that much at all. So keeping it at K32 is completely fine, and then now you're at choose number of plots. So the choose number of plots, the way you want to calculate it is the maximum number of plots that you can run on the system. So for me, I have an i7-7700K and it has 4 cores and 8 threads, and I also have 32GB of RAM. So for me, doing 8 plots and 1 thread per plot will be the ideal situation. But the only issue is that I don't have enough SSD available to be plotting on. So I'm using a Seagate external SSD and it barely has any more storage to be able to use it for plotting. So I'm just going to show you guys how to do it, and then from there you know where you're going. And then here I have the plots drive, which is the hard drive that I'm going to be sending the plots to. So now let's say hypothetically I have 4TB SSD that's free on my storage, and then I can use that for temporary plots. So what I would do then is I would go ahead and do 7 plots. So my CPU and RAM can afford doing 8, but my storage can only afford doing 7. So once you go ahead and find the number of plots that you can do, based on what I showed you guys earlier, after that you want to go ahead and click on plot in parallel, and then also expand the details so you can see more details. So here you'll see you have a delay till the next plot starts. And the way that you want to use this delay is whenever you finish phase 1, you want to start another plot. So whenever one plot finishes phase 1, you start another plot, so which means you need to figure out what's your phase 1 delay. Now one of the easiest ways to do that, which is what I did here, I just ran a little plot here, and whenever it reaches 31% or 30%, that means it basically finished phase 1. So now I don't have mine reaching 30% yet, and it's taking a very long time because of the external SSD that I'm using, but I will be showing it to you from another example. So for example, here in this file, you will be able to see that the phase 1 finished, and this is how many seconds it took to finish. So you just want to divide that by 60, and then you have the delay in minutes. And then back at your GUI in Windows, to figure out your log, you can just go ahead and click on the 3 dots and then do view log. And then once you do view log, you will see something like that, and you just want to go ahead and wait until your 7 table is done. And after your 7 table is done, you will find your phase 1 finish time. So that's basically how you get that delay. So now we go back to add plot, and then we put our 7 plots back in, and after that we do plot in parallel. Now I don't know exactly when is my delay, but this is just to give you guys an example. Whatever time you find in that log, then you just want to divide that by 60, and for your RAM you will notice here that it says 3390 or somewhere around that number, and that is in megabytes, which means that you won't be using all of your RAM, which is good, so you can keep some RAM for your operating system. You don't want to max out your RAM completely because that will slow down your system and potentially crash it as well. Now the more threads you end up using per plot, the more RAM you can start using, so I would just put it at 3405 to 3410 if you're using 4 threads, and if you're using 2 threads then you can just leave it the same way it is. And then here you have your number of threads, so we're going to say 4 threads. And this will be 4 threads per plot only in phase 1, and after that they're only going to be taking 1 thread per plot. And then the rest of that you can just leave it default. So number of buckets, you want to leave it at 128. It doesn't really change much if you do 256 or 64. And then your queue name, you can just name it whatever you want. This is for when you do multiple queues, so you can keep track of them. As for disabled bitfield plotting, you also can keep that enabled. It helps reduce the amount of writes on your SSD, so that means it maintains it for longer, and it does boost the speed a little bit. You might want to disable it if you're using a very old CPU, but as of now, you should probably be fine just keeping it enabled. And then exclude final directory. If you don't have a hard drive that you're going to be putting all the plots in, then you can do exclude, and then you can just have one drive which will be plotting into it, and then also putting the final plots in it. But I would highly recommend having an actual final directory with a different drive that's an HDD. So now we would go down here. The last step of it is selecting your temporary directory. So the temporary directory for me will be my external SSD. Now make sure that you don't use your local disk C because you will definitely corrupt it. And then I will select my plots folder in my Seagate. My Seagate is just a backup drive, and I made a little folders for plots in there so I can just use it for this example. Now you can also select the entire drive without a folder at all, which is completely fine. And now for your final directory, that's where you're going to be selecting your hard drives. So you want to do browse and then go to your disk PC and then select your hard drive. So in my case it will be plots 1. You might have to format your hard drive if it's brand new, so just go to your disk utility, and it's super quick process to just format it, and then it will show up for you here. So now also in the select temporary directory, you can add another temporary directory, so that will be your other NVMe SSD, and then from there you can go ahead and do create plot. So now you can see here after I did create plot, it started off with one at 0%, and then all the other ones are just being queued in. So this one won't be kicked in until 45 minutes have passed, and then hopefully by 45 minutes this plot has already reached 31%. So like that you can maximize the amount of plots that you're going to be plotting on your system, and you can avoid overusing your resources, causing crashing and all that stuff. Because if you do crash your system, all these plots, all the process that's on them will be resetted, so it's something that you really need to perfect and keep an eye on. You will also need to make sure that you go to your temporary storage and delete all the plots that are made and not finished. So all these temporary files of different plots, you can go ahead and delete them if the plot has crashed, and then you just have to start it all over again. Now that's basically it for the plotting process. Now you just need to give it some time until it finishes plotting, and after it's done plotting, it will by itself move on and starts farming. And then from there you can decide to unplug your hard drive whenever you want and plug it into a different system, and then just add the plots directory to your farming overview, and then from there we'll start farming right away. So it's super simple to just get it going again whenever you're done plotting. Plotting is just the complicated part of the process, and then that's it after that. So now hopefully you're up to speed with how to start plotting and how to start farming. There is a lot more to plotting where you can increase your efficiency using command line, and it's more preferred to do it on Linux, because there's also a lot of awesome tools that you can use to automate your plotting. Now I will be going more over that all in a separate video that's specific to just plotting and farming, and then this video will just act like an overview for everything all around. So after all this, do I think Chia farming is worth it or not? Now this is my own opinion and it's not a financial advice, so please keep that in mind. Now what I did after learning about the Chia farming, first thing is I went to look at the profitability and how profitable it will be down the line. So with how fast the current network space is growing, your profitability will drop a lot by the time you finish plotting your drives. So for example, my goal is to get around 100 terabytes and then plot these hard drives with 930 plots. Which means with these numbers right now, you guys will see, wow, it's a lot of money, $7,000 a month, but that's only after I have them plotted. Now to be more realistic, you can go to the advanced tab, and then here you'll see what will happen by the time you finish plotting. So if I have an average plotter that's not that good, then my plotting speed will be around 2.50 TB a day. And then I have around 92 TB to finish plotting, so it will take me a lot of time to finish plotting. Now you'll see here my total earnings will be exponential at first for the first like 2 weeks, and then after that it will start flattening out and barely make any money. So we'll go from making $100 a day to only cents a day, and that is just due to the network space growing exponentially. Now of course that's also based on the Chia price, so if a Chia goes up in price you'll make more money, and then it's also without pool mining. So with pool mining this will potentially be better, and it's not going to be as bad as solo mining, but it's still definitely going to be a lot lower profits. But that still didn't stop me from foaming into some hardware, and I got a couple of hard drives and a couple of SSDs and a bunch of more parts, and I'm going to be putting those together in a different video. Now other than the farming side of things, Chia as a project of being green is a good idea, but also I don't think it's that much of an issue in the future. A lot of mining farms are moving towards renewable energy, so all these proof of work facilities won't be causing that much of an environmental damage. Now of course that's just based on what I've looked into. I could be completely wrong and Chia is the way to go, but this is just my opinion. If you think otherwise, please let me know in the comments below, I'm curious to know. And that wraps up the conclusion. So yes, I will be plotting around 100 terabytes of drives to test it out and just add it to my little farm of proof of work and proof of coverage. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a thumbs up, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.